combined. In it the Quran was revealed to Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon his soul. Ramadan, 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 Ramadan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Welcome back to another episode of Ramadan Spirit right here on Huda TV, coming to you live from Dubai at 4 p.m. Mecca time. Wow, it's a bittersweet time for us right now. I mean, obviously we're right around the corner from Eid al-Fitr, which is one of the two happiest occasions for the Muslims in the entire year. But at the same time, we're saying goodbye, or slowly saying goodbye, or getting ready to say goodbye to a very blessed and special and honorable guest who has visited with us for almost a month now, which is, of course, the blessed month of Ramadan. Obviously we can't, and because of this bittersweet nature of this time, I mean, we need to kind of reflect upon this month. We need to reflect upon the things that we have done this month. We need to see how this month has benefited us, and we need to, obviously be appreciative to Allah that He has allowed us to even reach this month. So we're going to be addressing that in a little bit. I also want to touch on a very important point that, we've done many things in this month. I'm sure, all of the Muslims, in general, they increase their acts of worship. They do so much more in this month in terms of the prayer and the giving the sadaqah and reciting Quran and making dhikr and all of these other good actions that have been mentioned over and over again. So, but in a lot of times people feel really good about themselves. They feel really positive, and that's great and everything. But we also have to remember that there is another part to this equation that we have to really take into account. And I think to best illustrate this, we will take a instance or an incident that occurred with one of our pious predecessors, namely Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala. And he was once found crying by the people, and they asked him, "Why is it that you are crying? Is it out of the fear of death?" Because it was towards the end of his life. He said, "No." And they asked him, "Is it out of the fear of the punishment of Allah, the punishment of the grave and the hellfire and whatnot?" And he said, "No. It is not the fear of death nor the fear of the hellfire that is making me cry right now. Rather, it is the fear that I've been doing all of these decades of worship and scholarly work and teaching and all of these things, and yet I do not know if any of my actions have been sincerely for the sake of Allah and thereby been acceptable to Allah." This is Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah. I mean, he is one of the very early generations, one of the greatest scholars of this ummah. I mean, his piety, his righteousness, his taqwa, his iman these are like mountains, if you will. And yet, his overriding concern at the end of it all, at the end of his life, were any of his actions accepted by Allah? This is a big lesson for us. We need to really be, take that really strong accounting of ourselves. You remember when Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh says, "Take accounting of yourselves before you are taken to account, and weigh your deeds yourself before they are weighed for you." When we talk about weighing our deeds, it's not just about what you've done. It's about how many times you finished the Quran, or how many times you recited a certain dhikr or something. It's about how much khushu' did you do it with. It's quality over quantity. How sincere was it? Was it truly for the sake of Allah? Did you make sure that this act of worship was eligible to be accepted by Allah or not? And this is the most we can do. Obviously, no one of us has any assurance that anything we have done has been accepted by Allah. And this is a very scary fact. And this should be more encouraging than discouraging. What this should do is encourage us to continue to do more, rather than to become lax, or rather than to despair and say, you know, there's no point, or I've done so much already, or what are all these other ways that the shaitan approaches us. Rather, this should spur us forward to do even more, even beyond the month of Ramadan or any other particular time, to always be doing good deeds with the hope, you know, all it might take from you, the difference between hellfire and heaven for a given person could be one action, could be one tasbih, could be one takbir. And we try to do so many big things, but it could just come down to one action and how truly, sincerely it was done for the sake of Allah and whether or not He accepted it. So this is a big lesson for us, especially as we draw close to the conclusion of this month of Ramadan, this month of worship, of intensifying the worship. People have done so much in this month. And may Allah reward them, may Allah accept from us all of our deeds, our fasting, our prayers, our supplications, and all of the extra good things that we've done. But remember that we're making dua that Allah accepts this from us, and there is no guarantee that this dua will be accepted or that our deeds will be accepted. That being said, I want to introduce our guest today. I'm joined by none other than my beloved Imam, Sheikh Tahir Khalid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I called you Imam and Sheikh in one breath.
That's right.
Yes.
And I'm neither.
Okay.
I'm shaking, maybe, but not shaking.
How have you been? How's the month of Ramadan? I mean, it's almost over, but we're still in it.
You know, everyone's saying this everywhere. Everyone's saying this. What happened?
Yeah.
This year really just like tremendous speed. Yeah. Since we're here right at the conclusion, what happened? Just like that, just zip, you know. And of course, this is one of the signs of the last days. You know, time will run very rapidly, and we're seeing this in front of our eyes. And for us, the points that you mentioned are so important for us to reflect on. And I want to just kind of be specific and address the older people right here. Most of the time I'm talking to young people, people who are younger than me. And when I was thinking about it, when I was coming, I said, you know, I need to talk to the older people, at least to begin with, the senior citizens. People say you're in your golden age, you know, and we need to understand, they're very important what you said about the golden age. What is the golden age? What does it mean now I'm retired? I can just sit down on what is it I've done in my life. My children now are grown. I'm playing with my grandchildren. That's fine. All that's good. But we have to have that continuity, and we have to have that concern about every single day. And it's interesting because the Prophet ﷺ said more or less that his nation is will live to be about 60 or 70 years old. So if you're over 60, and of course this doesn't exclude people under 60, but if you're over 60 now and you made this Ramadan, be very, very thankful, reflect, think about what is your present status. Think about all of your friends and family members who are gone. For me personally, this year, this last week, I've never experienced it like this, and actually last Jummah, several people, situations we had. Someone wind up being in intensive care. Another person died. Another one close to death. I mean, so many situations right on Jummah this past week, which I've never experienced before in Ramadan like this. And it's a reminder for me. It says, you know, this is a wake-up call for you. As you were saying, okay, look at what you're doing. Look at what you've done. Okay, let's make it specific. Okay, we're in Ramadan. What did you do this Ramadan in relationship to what you had planned to do? Where are you? Where are you going from here? Okay, in the month of Shawwal, what is it that you're going to be doing in that next month, as an example? So we should reflect. We should reflect very seriously, and not be. I find, like you were saying, sometimes people, when they come after Ramadan, they become a little pessimistic. Well, it was easy in Ramadan, now it's very difficult. So I can't do that anymore. I'll wait till next Ramadan. And this is why I'm saying for the elderly, people says, listen, no guarantee about that. Yeah. Think about it, you know, plan it, take your time out. Now you should be concerned about your hereafter. And the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, this was after 40, not 60. After 40, they began to turn their lives towards the akhirah, the hereafter. Not only at that time, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, Ali radiallahu anhu famously said, live for the akhirah as if you will die tomorrow.
Yes.
And you know, you're saying this to the older folks, and obviously that's much more real. The inevitability of death is much more real for older folks. But I mean, yeah, man, every time you pick up the newspaper, you know, you got, I mean, in this part of the world, these high-rise buildings, you know, kids are falling out of these windows, you know, people are dying in car accidents, people are just getting sick. I mean, how many people, young people, I mean, I'm talking their 20s and 30s, right? They'll just come home and just drop dead, you know, just some freak heart attack or a blood clot, or, you know, there's a million things that could happen.
Absolutely.
Right? And no one of us has any guarantee that we will live to see next Ramadan or even next week or next month or anything like that. So obviously this is obviously from the ghafla, when the shaitan preoccupies us so much with these worldly things that we forget about this inevitable thing that is coming after us. It's chasing behind us, and it can catch up to us at any moment. And no one really knows when it's going to come.
Well, we have so many distractions today. And those distractions, many of them are there purposely to keep your mind away from this reality, or to make you afraid of that reality. And Islam embraces that. I mean, this is something that distinguishes us from any other people. Islam embraces that. Islam, you know, people say, well, you know, this is kind of, you know, you guys are very negative. Why do you always talk about dying, you know, in the grave? And why do you have all of these rituals and things related to death? It says, well, let's think about time. How long will you be dead compared to the time that you lived on this earth? If you understand what it is and you believe in it, and you believe in it, then there's no issue for you. If you're a person that believes that this is your paradise, then you're in a very serious dilemma.
Right. And this actually reminds me of what you said at the very beginning. I mean, when you talked about the fact of how quickly this Ramadan has went, and everybody's lamenting the same thing, basically, how fast it's went. You know, I heard a good statement that basically that if people are lamenting about how fast Ramadan is going, okay, then we should also think about how fast our life is going in general, right? I mean, this is basically a parallel or a microcosm of a larger issue, which is how fast our lives are going. I mean, just imagine, where did the past 5 years go? Or the past 10 years go? I mean, it was really like a blink of an eye, and that's what we know in the Quran, especially the people who will suffer a bad fate on the Day of Judgment, that they will be lamenting about, that we were only in this world for just a blink of an eye or even less.
And the value. I was just talking to one of my friends who was a graduate of Medina Munawwara University the other day, and we were laughing. We were saying, you know, how grateful we were and how thankful we were young. We had the opportunity to meet some of the leading people of our era, of our time. And when you get older, you realize the real value of, you know, these people who were very wise. And then, of course, they're gone. Yeah. They're gone. And it makes you value it even more. I remember we got a chance to meet Sheikh bin Baz, who was, of course, one of the leading scholars of our time. And I'll never forget, he told us, he said, listen, related to something that you were saying, he said, Islam is like the sea. You know, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
So this related to what you're talking about, you know, Sheikh Sufyan al-Thawri. These people who had this very strong connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how much knowledge and ability Allah gave them, and they said, well, I know nothing.
Right, right. Let's take a break right now. We'll be right back right here on Ramadan Spirit. Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum, bismillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Welcome back to Ramadan Spirit right here on Huda TV. Before we continue with the next segment, I want to mention to everyone that this is a live show and the number will be posted on the screen, so make sure you call in anytime to ask any questions or comments about tonight's topic. We're obviously talking about the end of the month of Ramadan, and we're going to get into some other issues that we're facing, obviously we're up against. I also want to remind everyone to check out the Facebook page, also of our sister show, A Time to Please Allah, which is constantly being updated with the information for this show as well. So we were talking, I have the guest in studio here, Sheikh Tahir. We're talking about the month of Ramadan. We're talking about how obviously it's coming to a close, and you were talking about how well, I guess I mentioned the fact that Ramadan ended so quickly, it went so fast. I mean, this is a big parallel to our entire life. I mean, how quickly our life is going, whether we're realizing it or not. And then you were talking about how it's about, I think the point that you were trying to make, and I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, and I do want to let you finish your point, but the fact of trying to take advantage of our time, trying to maximize or optimize our time to make sure we get maximum benefit out of it. You were talking about meeting with the right people or getting that right mindset and doing the right things. Before I throw it over to you, we have a phone call. Abu Hudayfa from Dubai. Assalamu alaikum.
I would like to ask one question.
Yes?
Actually, I was reading about who deserves to get the cattle fitr. So I usually send it back home to Kenya, where I came from. And I found that in the website, it's written that we're not supposed to send outside the country where we reside if there is a needy person in this country. But so far, I used to send it home, and I would like to ask who deserves it. Well, sometimes I give it to my relatives, my uncles, my aunts. So is this the right way, or just can you clarify for me, please?
Okay. So the brother's asking about sending. You're talking about sending money or to your. Money. Yeah. Okay, so the brother is talking about sending money to his home country for the zakatul fitr at the end of the month of Ramadan. So, brother, if I can ask, we're going to be discussing zakatul fitr in just a minute or two. So if you could stay tuned, we will address this issue, if you don't mind. Okay. Jazakallah khair. So, I don't want to keep rehashing what you were saying, but the idea of taking benefit of our time. So please, continue with the point that you were making about, meeting with you were talking about meeting with the good people. What Shaykh bin Baz said, rahmahullah, about, this Islam is like an ocean, and it's, the more you go into it, the more you realize how vast it really is.
Yeah, I was addressing basically elderly people, but not only and exclusively, but I find that maybe even myself, most of the time I'm dealing with young people, and most of the time when I'm in gatherings, I'm the oldest person there, or one of the eldest. Most of the time these days. It's a reality. I tell people, if you live long enough, you get old. That's the reality that you face. So I was just basically talking and gearing myself towards elderly people. I found what happens, a lot of times when you get elderly, you become sedate. You become kind of discomfortable, get in your comfort zone, and you don't venture out. You're not so quick to venture out, which is not really necessarily a big thing, but we just be comfortable in what you're doing. And I think that's kind of dangerous. You have a tendency to live on your past laurels. And you find a lot of people, and I'm not belittling anyone or putting anyone down, they have all the certificates and things up on the wall and the trophy cases and all these things about what you used to do, when, okay, or when I was young and so forth and so on. And I'm not against that, I'm not attacking that at all. But I think that we should continue, as you were saying, that sincerity, man, it's a very difficult thing to pinpoint. It's not easy. It's not easy to, if you look at the people that you're talking about, many of the great Sahaba, they had the same concern. The leading companions of the Prophet ﷺ had this concern about sincerity. They were with the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Bakr Siddiq was with him from the beginning. There was a person who had this concern. Yeah. So what about me? Okay, as an example. So this is something, I have to really, you really think about it. I have to really be focused on this and work on this and do what I need to do in relationship to myself. I need to really reflect and not be in denial about it. So, one of the things, like, just today I was sitting down and says, well, let me just get some paper and start writing, here is where I'm at, this is what I wanted to do, these are some of the things I wanted to do, I was not able to do, but I know I need to do this. Okay, I need to do this. Okay, so what am I going to do about it? And what is going to be my timeline about this? Because I'm going to get busy, and then I say, well, I'm going to put it over here as an example. So, I just suggest everybody just reflect on yourself. Be, this old saying, right? To thy own self be true. Look at yourself. Look, the man in the mirror. Look at yourself and see, really, where am I? Where am I? Truthfully, where am I? Because again, as we mentioned, tomorrow's not promised. It's not promised. And when you get like this, you better wake up. Yeah. You better have that reality. And if you don't, you better start working towards it.
Yeah. I want to also introduce, we're joined by our other guest tonight, which is our Ustad Muhammad Tim Hanbal. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How have you been? How's Ramadan?
Very, very well. Alhamdulillah. Fadlan min Allahi wa ni'mah.
So obviously you've been able to catch the first part of the conversation. So please weigh in.
Yeah, while I was listening to the two of you chatting about this, something came to my mind. And that was this concept that our deeds are by and large judged by the end of what we do or the conclusion of what we do. And so whether we're talking about on a micro scale this Ramadan or on a larger scale our entire lives, what really matters is what remains and not what is gone. What is gone, you can make up for that, you can repent for it, you can change, you can do a whole load of things. But what really, really matters is taking advantage of what remains. So what we don't want someone to do is to sit there in older age or as a young person at the end of Ramadan, because they're both equally applicable. We don't want someone to sit there and say, I've lost it. You know, I spent my life disobeying Allah, or I spent my Ramadan disobeying Allah. I haven't taken advantage. I wasn't praying. I didn't go for Taraweeh. I didn't go for the Qiyam. I didn't do this or that or the other. Rather, we want to see people that you still have 2, 3, however many days left. You still have whatever Allah has written for you to have from your life. And so just as much as you're not guaranteed tomorrow, what you do have is right now. And that is a huge opportunity for a person to change, for a person to say, it doesn't matter now what is gone, what I've repented from, what has happened. Now I have a chance to change myself. I still have so many days left of Ramadan. And Allah Azza wa Jal in every night of Ramadan has people that are freed from the hellfire. And so there is nothing to say that you can't be one of those people, even if you have missed out on the opportunity of seeking that in the previous days. So I think it's really important for people to recognize that your deeds are judged by the end. You might live your whole life as a very, very good Muslim, worshipping Allah, turning to Allah, but if the end of your life is not compatible and in agreement with what passed in the early part, then at the end of the day you'll be judged on the last thing that you did. And so that's something that a lot of people have to bear in mind. And it's also not just a negative but a positive as well, in the sense that if you haven't had the best few weeks and days, then you have an opportunity to get that, inshallah.
Right, so that's an interesting point. I mean, we're talking about the end of the month of Ramadan like it's almost over or something, which it is almost over, but the fact of the matter remains we still have 3 days in front of us.
And right? it might be a dua. Right. It might be the time of, you might only need a minute before Maghrib on the last day of Ramadan, and perhaps Allah Azza wa Jal will accept your dua and forgive your sins. So.
And maybe that's the one dua or the one dhikr or the one tasbih that will decide your fate between the heaven and hellfire. Maybe you're exactly 50-50, and this is the one last deed that you do that decides your fate one way or another.
And this is why we have this hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا ولو أن تلقى أخاك بوجه طلق. Don't belittle any good deed. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala commented on this hadith. He said, because, or I'll paraphrase roughly what he said, it's a rather large quote, but he said that you don't know the one deed that might be the one that balances you and takes you to Jannah. And you don't know the one sin, as minor as it might be, that brings the anger of Allah upon you and sends you to Jahannam. And if you don't know that, then don't belittle any small good that you do. You know, if you imagine the people of Al-A'raf, whose good deeds and bad deeds are entirely equal. And Imam Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah ta'ala, as I recall, he wrote like a letter in which he said that I don't know how I can be one of those people. How can I do enough good deeds to be, for my bad deeds and good deeds to be equal? But in any case, if you imagine you're from the people of Al-A'raf and your good deeds and bad deeds are equal, at this point you would have done anything for one tiny small good deed that you can do that remains in this time in Ramadan, or you know, in a couple of minutes, or whatever Allah Azza wa Jalla has written left of your life. You would give anything, you would give whatever is in the earth in order to have that one single good deed that would balance your scales on the side of good. So for sure we shouldn't look down on any good deeds, and we shouldn't look down on the time that we have remaining of Ramadan, or the time that we have remaining in our life.
Right, and these are still we're still in the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, which are the 10 best nights in the entire year. You know, Allah, as is the case in every night, Allah is coming to the lowest heaven in the last third of the night and calling out to the people to see who is calling upon Him, who is asking of Him. So the opportunity is so many, and I think that's a great point that you made, that we cannot despair of you know, what we haven't done, or mistakes that or the shortcomings that we've had. We cannot despair because of that, because while we're still alive, we still have a chance to, you know, for salvation, right?
I think on top of that as well, I mean, not only for sure we have a chance, but also we have to remember that we don't know that Laylatul Qadr has already passed us by. Laylatul Qadr is something that people often have a lot of confusion about, and a lot of people, what they do is they tail off after the 27th night. So the 27th night, that's it. They don't, you know, that the masjid is empty now, whatever's gone is gone, and that's also the wrong attitude to have, because first of all, Laylatul Qadr can be in any of the odd nights of Ramadan, and secondly, if we take of the last 10, secondly, if we take the other narration which indicates that Laylatul Qadr is in the odd nights starting from the end of the month and not the beginning, then it can also fall on an even night as well. So it can, if the month is 30 days long, then it can fall on the 26th or the 28th and so on. So we should also not feel that the best of the month may well not yet have passed us by. So there's a huge opportunity for us.
Yeah, we addressed a lot of the Laylatul Qadr issues on a previous episode, but I mean, obviously the right approach is to approach all of the last 10 nights with devotion and worship and a really intensification, because we don't really know, and there's wisdom in this. And so what you mentioned is absolutely very apt, and it's so true. I mean, last night was the 27th night, okay? I'm scared. I'm already scared to go to the masjid tonight for Taraweeh to see how empty it's going to be, because tonight is the 28th. Everybody's confident that, you know, whatever they did last night, that was it. To be honest with you, as far as I'm concerned, I heard animals that were fighting outside my house last night, which was a bad sign for me in terms of if it was Laylatul Qadr. So it was towards the end of the night, and there was cats screeching and howling and fighting and all sorts of things. So this is obviously one of the big things that wouldn't make it Laylatul Qadr. Allahu Alam. But the idea is that we, obviously perform the worship in all of the last 10 nights seeking Laylatul Qadr, and this is the approach of the Sunnah. That being said, I want to go to we had a caller asking about Zakatul Fitr. This is something that is obviously an obligation upon the Muslims. It is coming. It's once a year. It's an obligation upon all the Muslims. People make a lot of mistakes when it comes to this. There's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings. So spend, Ustad Muhammad, spend a couple minutes, just give us some background about what it is and then how we should approach it the right way, I guess. Okay, so there's a few things that make Zakatul Fitr different to regular zakah and indeed to regular charity. The first thing is that Zakatul Fitr is an obligation upon for every member of the household, not necessarily as zakah or as something else might be. This is even if you have very, very small children, babies, etc. All of them have to be accounted for when it comes to the Zakatul Fitr. However, the responsibility of actually paying that falls to the head of the household in terms of making sure that for each person within their household they have paid the Zakatul Fitr. The Zakatul Fitr is not a monetary amount. It's an amount, a volume, which is a sa'. And a sa', the scholars differed over the correct measure. Now it's a measure of volume, so we should be measuring in liters, not in grams or kilograms. So whenever you find Zakatul Fitr mentioned in kilograms, it's an approximation. Usually, of course, it's measured in dollars or pence or in
if
pounds.
We go back to the original, then it's a measure of volume. Okay, so it needs to be measured in liters. And I think the most correct opinion with regard to the sa' is 3 liters. However, it has been said 2 liters and 2.5 liters and 3 liters. And I think that 3 is the stronger opinion. But in any case, it's a volume. And it should be a volume of whatever is the standard kind of staple foodstuff in the country that you're in. So it might be dates, it might be wheat, it might be rice, it might be anything which is a standard kind of staple foodstuff that people can benefit from. It can be given as money, but when it's given as money, we have to understand that we're not paying Zakatul Fitr in money. What we're doing is we're basically passing the responsibility to somebody to purchase that food on our behalf. I.e. we're appointing a wakil, because you can't give Zakatul Fitr in money. What you can do is appoint a wakil, and that wakil is essentially your representative who takes your money and purchases the required food and distributes that food to the poor and the needy on the day of Eid. So as an example, you may have a charity, you pay your, I think here is it 20 dirhams here?
It's 20, yeah.
I think 20 dirhams, yeah. And the purpose of this is you're not giving 20 dirhams to a poor person. What you're doing is you're giving it to a charity who will then go and purchase for you the required amount of foodstuff and give it to the poor person. There's no harm in that. So we distinguish between the two cases. You're not allowed to give the poor person, there's 20 dirhams, go and spend it on what you like, but you are allowed to appoint somebody to purchase the food on your behalf. So you pay the money and they will go and purchase and distribute the food. In terms of where it should be distributed, there's no doubt that the most deserving place is to begin with any zakah. Zakatul Fitr especially is to look at the locality, your own locality, and whether there are people within the country or within the locality who are in need of the Zakatul Fitr. However, if we limited it to the locality only, then if you look at countries that are very rich and well off, you would find that actually what would happen is a lot of poor people elsewhere in the world would not benefit from it. So what we say is that the authorities and the charities and the people who are responsible, what they will normally do is that they will ensure that the poor people in the locality and in the country have had their due, they've had their Zakatul Fitr, and that whatever is excess, they will arrange to give it perhaps to a needy country. I think this is perhaps a balanced opinion with regard to giving the Zakatul Fitr abroad.
So for an individual who lives in maybe a country that's more well off relatively, what would you recommend him doing? I mean, if he has access, or he has, like you said, a representative maybe in another country who is willing to receive money and distribute food on his behalf to people that need it probably a lot more than where he is at himself, should he try to take care of his zakat in the country he's at? I mean, where should he give preference to? Or should, if he has such a scenario, such a operation or system set up in another country, should he send the money and have them do it there? I mean, where would we give the preference in a situation like this?
I think that he has a few options. I think if there is a government entity or a charity that is organizing the Zakatul Fitr, then the hope is that they will themselves organize that. So by paying for it locally, they will give it locally to those who need it, and they will know how much of it is to be sent abroad. It's the same situation, for example, on Eid al-Adha, when it comes to the sacrificial animals in Saudi Arabia. Of course, those animals are to be given to the poor of Makkah. However, the poor of Makkah are a small number in relation to the huge number of animals that are sacrificed. So the government themselves as an organization has a system whereby they know approximately the number that are needed locally. They send them, and then the rest they send to the poor abroad, and they kind of take care of that for you. However, again, if you're doing this as an individual and that facility doesn't exist, then you have a couple of options. If you see that the poor people in your country are being well taken care of, and you genuinely don't see that there is any, whatsoever, any kind of extra or any kind of people still waiting for Zakatul Fitr, and you're confident of that, and then you send it abroad, then I don't think there's so much harm. But I think you also should be very careful not to presume that there are no poor people in the country that you're in. Because in fact, if you look at a place like the Emirates, there are a lot of people who are struggling. They don't have enough food for their Eid day. There are a huge number of them. And so what we should be careful of is presuming that because we live in a country that is relatively well off, that there aren't any people. And the basic principle is that you give it locally. So I think that, if a person was to want to be perhaps more cautious, then I would say you strive to give it locally. And if you wish to send some sadaqah abroad to needy relatives, then this is good, even more, even better. For you to send your voluntary sadaqah, for you to send some extra money to the people abroad of a similar amount or a greater amount, I think this is even better, inshallah. But just make sure that that you really have taken care of the local issue before you end up sending everything abroad and then having people locally who are going hungry and needy on the day of Eid.
So I think one of the key points you also mentioned is that it is to be given in food, okay? And you could have somebody else do that for you and you just pay them, but the idea is that it should be an amount of food. And you mentioned the sa', which is, you said there are several opinions, but you feel the stronger one is that it's 3 liters. I've also heard that it would basically amount to about 4 or so double handfuls.
Yes, a sa' is 4 mud.
Okay.
And a mud is defined as a handful,
Okay.
but a mud has been well defined in volume as well.
Okay.
And this is where the disagreement comes. The disagreement is between 500 and 750 mil.
Okay.
So those who say 500 mil, they come to a conclusion that a sa' is 2 liters. And those who say 750 mil, they come to a conclusion that a sa' is 3 liters. And there are other opinions in between, like 600 mil and others. The way this is calculated is by historically the presence of containers that were passed on by the Sahaba and were said, this is the sa' of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because a handful is different from generation to generation, from person to person. I think that from what I've seen, the narrations gathering them together, the stronger opinion about the sa', about the mud, is that the mud is 750 mil. But I think the standard here that they tell people is 500 mil. That's okay, inshallah, as long as you're within what is believed to be a mud, which is between 500 and 750 mil, and that equates to a sa' of between 2 and 3 liters in volume.
Let's continue with the discussion right after this break.
Ramadan, Ramadan, Ramadan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Welcome back to the last segment of Ramadan Spirit. We've had an interesting show. We've been talking about obviously the end of the month and what that means for us, and then also the fact that there is still some more of the month left and we need to take advantage of it. We need to try to do our best to ensure that our deeds are acceptable to Allah. Also, obviously, since the Eid is just a couple days away, we can't mention that without talking about Zakatul Fitr, which is the zakah that is due upon every Muslim at the end of the month of Ramadan. So we've been talking about some issues related to that, and we had a caller also call in about this issue about sending money back or to another country and to have that being given as food in another country. So what our guest was mentioning, Ustad Muhammad was mentioning, is that first we kind of need to make sure that they're in our locality, in the area that you are, if there is any poor people there and if their needs are met. So this is something that we see a lot. I mean, we live in a fairly well-off country, I mean, relatively better, standard of living and whatnot. And a lot of times people think that, hey, my needs are met. I see everything around me. The roads are clean. The skyscrapers are tall and shiny. So it must be great, So there's no poor people here. Everybody's doing good just like me. You run into this sort of mentality, right?
Yeah, of course, and I was surprised, the first time that someone mentioned to me, I didn't know there was any poor people here. And I mean, someone was living here. And then I thought about it and I said, well, where that person lives here, I could understand that because they're insulated. To be fair, they're insulated from this environment. They're not like me. I go everywhere, any place, anytime. Okay, so it's a distinctly different lifestyle than the lifestyle I personally live. So I said, well, look, and they told me, well, I usually do like so and so. I said, fine, like if you can deal with the charities, it's fine. But listen, we have a responsibility to our society, and I'm not saying that the charities are not doing that, but what have we been told? We've been told very simply that there are people among us who are the most sincere people who will never let you know their condition. So to do that, you have to do some investigation. I don't mean like be a private investigator, but just have some concern about your neighbor. What is the condition of your neighbor? When you say, I wish for my brother what I wish for myself, is that sincere? Prophet ﷺ said something very clear about this. If you make soup, put some extra water in it, give some to your neighbor, to show that kind of sensitivity for the people that you're living with. Not that I'm trying to investigate what's going on in your household. No, not that at all. So part and parcel of it, I think, is, this kind of relationship we have with the people we pray with and the people who we live with, and understanding the necessities that we have on a daily basis. And particularly in this time, in Ramadan, it would be a terrible thought in a society like ours to have to imagine that someone doesn't have food to eat. And this is one of the things that personally, after being here for 21 years, I found that, I've never heard of a person who was hungry that someone wouldn't feed them. If someone did come and said, listen, I'm hungry, man, I need something to eat, that someone said, come, let's go, immediately. Or someone's eating, said, join us. An example, and I think that's extraordinary character of the people. So this is something, of course, in this particular time, which we should carry over, and can carry over into of course, when we're dealing with the responsibilities of Zakat al-Fitr.
I remember an example that happened in my hometown in Newcastle. And you know, the UK is generally, it has a strong welfare state. Generally, people who are poor receive welfare payments, and there shouldn't, in theory, be anyone who is going hungry on Eid. So the local masjid took the principle of sending the money, especially because to send abroad takes a little time, it takes a couple of days. So they would collect the money in the last few days of Ramadan and they would send it over to India. And they would feed the poor in India. And I spoke to the Imam of the masjid and I said to him, look, just bear with me and just announce that you're going to have Zakatul Fitr for the one who needs it to come and collect it on this day, and then everything that's left over you send it, Bismillah. And the reason I said this is I had noticed something, that at the local church outside of near to where the masjid is, there's a long queue of people, and that long queue of people were queuing up for a soup kitchen at the church, and that long queue of people contained a whole number of Muslims in there. Some of them were asylum seekers who were not eligible for welfare payments. Some of them were living without proper, I don't know, immigration status, paperwork, whatever. Sure. They couldn't get the support. And so these guys are going hungry. And where are they going for their food? On Eid day, they are lining up at the church. And the church are not giving away this food for free. They're giving it for free with a message. You know, they're giving you some dawah in there. And so all we did is just tell the local masjid just to announce that anyone who feels they will need Zakatul Fitr, just come and register. You don't even have to register your name, just register a number on the piece of paper, so we know roughly the number of people who will need it, and we'll leave a little bit extra over, and we'll put that aside for you, and then inshallah the rest of it we'll send it to people who are needy elsewhere. And when they did that, they found that it wasn't a huge amount, but there were in the region of, I don't know, 50, 100 people, something like that, who came to the masjid and said, we are in need of Zakatul Fitr and we're not able to, we don't have enough food to feed the family properly on the day of Eid. And so it's very surprising, subhanAllah. And I think this is a nice way of joining between the two. For sure, we want to take care of our brothers and sisters abroad. We don't want to be sat on piles of dates and barley and wheat and all of the rest that nobody wants here or nobody needs here. But at the same time, we do have to make really sure that we're not missing a segment of the society who, let's be honest, are often unseen and unheard of. And particularly in a place like we're here in Dubai, where you don't see that kind of segment of society who are really, really poor and destitute and needy very often. But they are there.
So, and you mentioned this about sending money overseas and the fact that it takes time. I mean, let's talk about the time aspect as well, because obviously there's a very strict deadline when it comes to Zakatul Fitr, and we need to be very cognizant of that.
Yeah, when it comes to Zakatul Fitr, Zakatul Fitr needs to be paid prior to the Eid prayer on the day of Eid. However, ideally you want to be bringing it 1 to 2 days before that. So the rough time, or the time that is appointed for Zakatul Fitr, is 1 to 2 days before the Eid prayer. However, whatever is paid prior to Salatul Eid is considered Zakatul Fitr. Whatever is paid after, and bear in mind, if you miss it and you don't pay it by the Eid prayer, then you still have to pay it. It's still an obligation to pay.
We should say give, right? I mean, because obviously it's about the food.
Yes. When I say, again, when we say the norm that people do are giving it to
somebody else,
to somebody else to do it for you. This is the circumstance of of the time we live in these days, where if I had a sa of rice, I don't know what I would do with it. SubhanAllah. But those people who give it prior to the Eid prayer, then they're considered to have given Zakatul Fitr. Those people who miss it, they still have to give it. However, it's not considered to hold the reward of Zakatul Fitr. Okay. So there's a double situation. They have to give it, but it's not considered to hold the reward of the Zakatul Fitr. And this gives us the indication of the danger. What a lot of people do is they delay it right until the last moment, and this is no good. It needs to be a day, 2 days before, and some of the scholars allowed in the last 10 days of Ramadan completely, especially if you're giving money to an organization who is then going to purchase food. There is no harm in you giving that money to them 5 days, 6 days, 7 days before Eid, because at the end of the day, the actual purchase and distribution is going to take place one day before Eid or on the night of Eid to the poor people, inshallah.
I mean, Zakat al-Fitr, the point is that the poor Muslims, especially in our immediate vicinity, that they are able to enjoy their Eid. And this is an idea that you could kind of even expand out further, the idea of sadaqah, the idea about keeping in touch with your ummah, keeping in touch with your neighbors, not living that insulated lifestyle. You could even talk about the whole concept of jama'ah, what that means. And I think the hadith you mentioned, that you're not a believer until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. And this is a very important aspect of this togetherness, and we should feel it at this time more so than any other time. I mean, we're basically out of time, but I mean, obviously the month of Ramadan, as it is coming to a close so rapidly, I mean, what Ustad Muhammad, what you mentioned about taking advantage of what is left, not minimizing these 3 days that are, or 3 nights particularly, that are in front of us, to take advantage of these as much as possible, because they could contain Laylatul Qadr. These are still the 10 best nights in the entire year. And Allah is releasing the people from the hellfire. And so we cannot minimize the performance of good deeds in this time. Do you want to add any last comments? Or?
Yeah, you know, this one of the things I've noticed many places in the world, the last night, the night before Eid, people forget that night because there's no Salat al-Tarawih. And the people in the souk, many times the people in the souk until almost daybreak, almost till Fajr, buying this like that, and many people have lost that. They've lost that night altogether.
And then they miss Fajr in the Jama'ah as well.
I'm not going to take it that far, but I'm just saying. I mean, I've seen this so many places, you know, where the people, now everybody's, you know, their concern is now Eid day and celebrating this thing, and they've lost that night. You know, the consciousness of the religiousness of that last night that you were talking about, these nights, in particular that night, and of course they've gotten into this. You know, getting into the materialistic aspect of it. So don't lose that night, the very last night. Don't lose it.
Right.
Sure. And a person, I think, one of the things I always like to mention, just whenever we do a talk on the last few days of Ramadan, is the question of how do you know your Ramadan has been accepted? Yeah. And at the end of the day, you know your Ramadan has been accepted, or you take glad tidings that there is a good possibility of your Ramadan being accepted if you see yourself performing good deeds in the day that follows that Ramadan. And the day that follows starts from Maghrib on the day prior to the day of Eid, all the way through the day of Eid. If you find it to be a day of obedience to Allah, then take glad tidings that there's a very good chance your Ramadan has been accepted.
Inshallah. We ask Allah to accept all of our good deeds in this past month. And I won't be seeing you again on Ramadan Spirit, but we will be back here live with our other host, Brother Gabriel Ad-Romani, tomorrow at 4 p.m. Makkah time, right here on Huda TV. With that, we'll take your leave. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
In it the Quran was revealed to Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon his soul. Ramadan, 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 Ramadan.